Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Tuck Shop Podcast. I'm Matt Cernell, actually recording live on site in the Living Learning Center for today's education event. David, good to see you.
It's good to be live in the Living and Learning Center.
Our second full-time remote.
Yeah.
Education takes advantage of us, and I
They
love
do.
it. I am so glad we can do
They
this.
do.
I'm also glad to welcome Mark Conlon. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me again.
Why are we here?
So I direct what's known as the American Civic Education and Literacy Initiative. We call it the ACE Initiative. So this is our second annual Civics Teacher Summit that we've hosted at the University of Pittsburgh at Johnstown. And so, yeah, we've had several partner organizations show up today. So National Constitution Center, Bill of Rights Institute, Classrooms Without Borders, Cambria 250, Fair Districts PA, Generation Citizen. I know I'm leaving somebody off here. The Rendell Center is here for sure.
The Rendell Center table has a lot of interest. David and I were going through the book of courthouses of Cambria.
Got my eye on that. I'm ready to buy one.
Pennsylvania.
It's very interesting.
What's the goal? What's the goal today? What's the program, and what's the goal to having these types of events?
Okay, so I mean, in general, it's a professional development session. The professional development is really typically we have that in schools. And they're kind of generically offered to kind of the entire school population. So this is a specialized one for social studies teachers, targeted primarily for civics education, but also there's some American history and world history involved in there too. But what is kind of a unique twist that I like that we get to offer is that we have our pre-student teachers here as well. We have our partner organizations are kind of involved in the sessions. They get to see what their other colleagues out there are offering, and we get community members as well to be participants in these things. So part of Dr. Spector's grand vision, I guess, for the American Democracy Scholar Certificate and the ACE Initiative is not only to work with our students themselves and teachers who are out in the field, but also the community members as well. So this provides a nice little unique experience to try and bring them all together.
So we have folks walking around today that include some teachers who are alum, which is kind of neat.
Absolutely.
You have some non-alum faculty or teachers from other departments and schools. You have our students from
Right.
here from UPJ, faculty from campus, staff members. It's kind of a really neat mix of community members on a kind of an icy day. We had to you could have done a little better on the weather, but not bad though, considering and it's a nice mixture of these people bringing their experiences together to learn these concepts.
Right. Yeah.
And what's then the feedback with especially because no matter what it is, and we're not a political show, thank God, but there's a lot of consciousness right now between more people being involved, more people understanding government, more people interested in democracy and elections and government across the board. What's then the kind of the feedback?
Yeah, so I think, obviously we're coming just off the tails of a new presidential administration coming in, and we've had interesting changes in policy and how funding is going, especially directed towards education. And without giving any sort of partisan opinion on there, it's been good to see. They're happy to have a space to kind of dialogue about these issues and to see how other groups are problem solving with what they're experiencing right now. And really a sort of like support network sometimes, I think, to kind of, what are you hearing? What is your district doing? What is your organization doing? How are we kind of navigating these waters right now? What's the battle plan moving forward for things? And so far, we're only halfway through the session right now, but feedback has been positive, especially from my pre-student teachers right now, and there are a couple of student teachers out there as well. Just, surprised at how much these organizations are able to offer them for their future classrooms, right? So how much they don't have to create materials, but there's already things that have been vetted by these organizations that they can, take the day they get it and run it inside their classroom, a well-prepared lesson that doesn't put them into choppy waters sometimes politically. As social studies teachers, the kind of wisdom is that you don't let your students know your political position as much as possible, right? You try and play devil's advocate, you try and play neutral. And some of these organizations especially are so good at training teachers to think in that way and to present this material in a politically neutral way so that they can then let their students drive those conversations, and they can be the ones taking the partisan positions and representing those things, and then even putting themselves in different shoes and representing the other side, you know what I mean, like pretending that they view something differently. And so providing those opportunities for seasoned teachers and new teachers, I think is the greatest benefit for it. And the community members really get to see what is happening in our classrooms, right? So there's so much rhetoric out there about what is or what is not happening, especially in a social studies classroom. And when we have community members involved here, it breaks down that wall, right? There's so much transparency as far as like what materials are you using and how are you approaching these topics.
Yeah, you make some interesting points, because I think that, I don't want to sound like a bumper sticker, but democracy works when people get involved.
Exactly.
When people say democracy doesn't work, well, did you vote? Do you know what you're talking about? Well, no, but that doesn't. But of course it does. So I think that's important. The interesting point that you make, though, is that neutrality, because it's so much more important.
Yeah.
Because we've become, as a society, so polarized.
Right.
That, I had a conversation the other day, and regardless of your political party, when I hear representatives say, I'm not voting this way because I'm not going to let anything that gets through that's on the other side.
Yeah, right.
I think to myself, how did you get the seat? And I'm afraid how you got the seat that you got, because where is this? I want to go back to think, the forefathers, like, was Ben Franklin ever not neutral?
Right.
How did we get to this point? And when I hear that, I think democracy is broken. When someone just says that, I don't like what you stand for or what you supposedly stand for, so I'm going to block it. I'm not even going to listen to a good idea. So I think that's a very important point to make, that, you're right. It's got to be a challenge for anyone. I know you've used interchangeably the word social studies and civics. I guess I'm a guy who came from when it was called social studies.
Yeah.
But to have a teacher that even, while I attended here at UPJ, sad to say, you knew some of your political leanings of some of your professors.
Sure.
I'm not taking that class, or I'm not taking this class, or I'm going to take that class. So I think that's very important. A couple of questions I had for you. So talk a little bit, if you could, what are some of the topics along those lines that are being presented, number one? And number two, I guess, so I don't have to ask the question a second time, is, so and this is the second annual, and I'm
This is
sure
second
we're
annual,
looking
yeah.
for third and fourth and so on and so forth. Two-part question. If somebody wanted to get involved, or somebody wanted to know what this is all about, who do they contact? How do they contact it? And is there opportunities not only on this day but throughout the year to continue that dialogue, whether it be in a classroom or in another event?
So I'll address that second question first. So I'm the direct contact for this. So my email is mac699@pitt.edu. That's Mark Conlon. You can also look up Mark Conlon UPJ and you'll find me. So I'm the direct contact for that. Are there other opportunities? We already have the second annual Democracy Bowl scheduled for April the 3rd.
Okay.
And that's where students who have been preparing will participate in a trivia competition and a service learning celebration, basically. And where we have many of the organizations that are here today will return to help judge and help run those events as well for us. Last year we had about 130 people altogether on campus for that event. There's also campus tours involved in that. So hopefully we have a larger success than we did last year.
That date again is?
It's April the 3rd.
So coming up.
So another Thursday. Yeah. And then the first question again, it's slipping my mind.
What are some of the topics being
yes.
presented today?
Okay, so
working to what you just said.
To kind of a point that you had brought up, there's several of them that are based upon service learning, right? So not only just delivering the content information inside the classroom, but actually having students inquire about what the issues are in their community, identifying the problems, coming up with solutions, and then implementing those solutions, and then reflecting afterwards to think, what went well, how could we improve upon this? Obviously, there's more content-based things as well, so the National Constitution Center and the Bill of Rights are kind of going over their frameworks that teachers can use to apply in their classroom, so it's kind of a more broad-based thing. The Rendell Center is talking about running mock trials inside of the classroom, so we have several local schools that do that project, but hopefully we can expand it, right? And I'll return back to the the first question that I answered, there's always room for more events as well, right? So if somebody wants to reach out and contact me specifically and has an idea of especially how we can bring in the broader Johnstown community, I'm open to kind of thinking about those things.
It's a really cool event, and when you're looking at the schedule, and there's a lot of different sessions that you got able to work in through the day, which is really neat. You also have a keynote speaker.
Right. Yes.
Talk a little bit about our keynote speaker.
Okay.
And actually, hopefully they'll join us here in a bit. But
So Mr. Leon Smith, he's the 2025 Pennsylvania Teacher of the Year. So he's a social studies teacher from Haverford High School. It's in Delaware County. He's such a dynamic gentleman. He's involved in so many boards discussing policy. He's working with the AP right now to kind of help develop their African American Studies program. Been a teacher in social studies for 24 years, and is really like interested in. What I like hearing from him was not only that he's interested in talking about that service learning aspect and does he get his kids more involved in the community, but also like how do we diversify the teacher pipeline. So he spent a significant amount of time in his kind of opening remarks talking about the lack of diversity in our teacher corps right now, and so how do we start to advocate for these different groups to come in and become teachers, right? Because this is something that Greater Johnstown High School is collaborating with us on. There are other local school districts collaborating with other universities across the Commonwealth right now, trying to figure out this problem, right? To have better representation within the teacher corps. It's just been a historic problem, especially in Pennsylvania, in central Pennsylvania especially.
and that has to be something that especially as the UPJ department, because we're as this university is so key and critical to providing teachers for the area, but also we have such a good reach that those are lessons that go well beyond just Richland, Johnstown, Forest Hill, the local districts here, but your students that go out to travel nationwide, actually. Yeah. And we have UPJ alum in education,
right? Yeah,
around the country doing the work.
And hopefully, our reach keeps spreading. I just had I got a random email from the Erie School District last night asking for me to share that they are in a deep hiring process right now, and please connect them. And so,
nice.
The more we can get our students out there to kind of spread out and spread the message of hopefully how they think our programs here are great programs and how well they were prepared, the more we can ideally bring onto campus, right?
We'd love to see it.
Yeah.
We're always looking for new alumni. After a couple years, they're going to be new alumni, so we always are looking for those.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Mark, thank you for taking your time to come, and I don't want to drag you too much because I know there's a lot going on, and we want to cycle some of your guests through the show. But thank you for coming and talking to us a little bit and doing the work to put something like this on campus.
Absolutely.
It's great to have these events.
I'm so happy to do it. I'm glad. Anytime you both want to invite me back on the podcast, I'm happy to do it. It's always a fun time.
That's fine. We'll put third chair out every week.
Right. Well, thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you.
I'll try and get some others.
All right, go grab some folks. In the meantime, let's talk a little bit about things that are going on, David. We typically have a plethora of different events coming up, and as always, right now is no different.
Yeah, so much going on. I had to grab our cheat sheet here. I have to remember this is going to come out next Wednesday. So a couple of things that are coming up are our popular Winterfest, February 14th and 15th. At this point, registration will be closed, but you can still come and.
Yeah, for anything you had to register for meals and stuff, that's going to be closed when you as you hear this on Wednesday. But doesn't mean that you can still come for the wrestling.
The wrestling matches.
You can still come for the basketball games on Saturday. You can come to see the bonfire.
You can come and warm.
Have the meal, but you also can hear the band.
Correct. Silver Screen
is going to play. So all those things are still available to you, even though you missed registration for a handful of the items. The majority of the day is registration free, so still come on up Friday and Saturday.
Bounce houses, the aquatic center will be open.
Yep.
So it is very family oriented and it is very community oriented. The strange thing, when the community comes back, we see a large group of alumni come back. That also, so it's kind of a two-folder.
And if you like to, you actually can watch us record a show at Winterfest.
Sure.
We're going to do this same thing at Winterfest and make quite a show of it for sure. So if you have ever wanted to come and watch somebody record a podcast,
We're looking for
we're
alum
gonna
to want to be
there
on
too.
it.
Or alum want to be on
Want
it.
to be on it. Also, we've got we've done this last year. We're doing it again. UPJ night at the Johnstown Tomahawks.
There you go.
The
Last week
Tomahawks.
you said the Chiefs.
Yeah, well, April 5th, you can get tickets for that on our Facebook page or LinkedIn page. Two other real quick things I want to talk about because I see Dr. Charlene joining us. UPJ Alumni Golf Spring Tournament on May 30th. That's going to be at Wimber. We are, stay tuned because we're going to be adding a second leg to our golf outings. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we get those details for a fall event. Last thing I do want to talk about the Media, Music, and More reunion, May 30th and 31st. And that is anyone that was an alumni of The Advocate, WPJ, AM, TV. We're even looking for trails, yearbook staff, and backroads. Stay overnight. Again, there will be a save the date card going out within the next week. Registration for that opens in March. Check it out. We'd love to have you guys come back.
I think it's good. It's great to have these upcoming events. Again, keep a track on all our social media. Download the show, subscribe to the show, tell your friends about the show. Just subscribe to your friends, family. Don't even tell them. Just make them subscribe and listen. Thanks, David. That's a good list of calendar events. No wonder we look tired.
That's just what I can remember.
Well, I am excited to always welcome back Dr. Charlene Rowland to the show. Friend of the show, executive producer. You've officially become a producer now, helping us out. How have you been, other than your morning?
Thank you so much, Matt and David, for inviting me. The morning, despite the weather, has been wonderful because we've been indoors for this Civics forum or summit that is being hosted here on campus at the Living Learning Center. And I'm grateful to Dr. Conlon and his team for hosting this. And despite the weather, we have a good group of people and sponsors. And our Teacher of the Year for Pennsylvania 2025, Mr. Leon Smith, has been a great speaker. He spoke about the need for new teachers coming in, also support for teachers of color, and just having the view about what civic education is all about.
It's like we talked to Mark a little bit. It's a great event. There's so many neat things going on and people. And even while we were setting up and some of the sessions were going on, Dave and I were picking through all the literature and some really cool things to see and to learn about. So thank you for always including us and thinking of us for these events.
Oh, you're welcome. We want our alumni to understand that Johnstown is not just a place for learning at the undergraduate level. It's also a continuous place for continuing education through professional development events here.
It's fantastic. Who did you bring us to be our next guest on the show?
Okay, I got a wonderful person, John Smith, who is from Greater Johnstown School District. And he's on the planning team of this wonderful democracy event here, as well as the upcoming Democracy Bowl in April. So I'm going to let him talk about all the concerns that teachers have, especially social studies teachers, as well as what they are doing about these concerns, not just sitting around the classroom, but really supporting our students and each other.
That's fantastic. John, thanks for coming to the show. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. Nice to meet you, Matt and David. Being a teacher during this time, it's very, very uncertain. You never know, especially with current events, what's going to happen next on the news, what's going to be the next discussion you have to have with your kids. It's very uncertain times. But being a social studies teacher, we were always delegated to the child's table at Thanksgiving. We're not a tested subject. There's no PSSA or Keystone that we have to teach for. So oftentimes districts, the state, they put us on the wayside. We receive less funding. We don't get the same care and concern the STEM classes receive. But arguably, and I might be biased saying this, we're one of the most important disciplines because not entirely everyone's going to go into a science or a mathematics-heavy field, but everyone will be a citizen voting, having to pay taxes, having to follow the laws, and that's what we're teaching in social studies, is how to be a civically engaged and knowledgeable citizen. Through our efforts here, we are really hitting civic education and American history, really trying to show everyone different opportunities, different professional developments, how we can grow as a discipline, how we can make ourselves put ourselves on that same level as the STEM classes. We're not a tested subject, like I said. We do have PA Act 35 of 2018. That's the closest we have to a tested subject, where we need to evaluate our students in grades 7 through 12, report the data to the state, but that's the extent of it. There's no test they provide us. Most school districts like us, we give them the citizenship test, and all we do is report the number to the state of how many received a perfect on it, and that has to be displayed on the website. That's it. There's no benchmarks, there's no proficient advanced, it's just a basic number. So with this, with the ACE initiative, with everything we're doing with UPJ, we're trying to make a name for social studies and put ourselves back on that map.
Why do you think that is, that they don't test that? Is it just because of the perception that that, again, like you talked about, the perception's a little different, and that just propagated as people who make these decisions ended up in power and said, well, we're going to do, because it's effectively looking at the math and the writing and stuff, but they just have that kind of built-in bias?
So a lot of our education right now is based off of getting students into the workforce. That's what it has developed over the past couple decades. And social studies has always been looked at. There's no measurable skill these students have. Most people think we're just lecturing to them and they're regurgitating information. And they feel there's no reason I need to be able to recite the Declaration of Independence. My future employer is not going to ask me what the Eighth Amendment of the Constitution is. So we're not a workforce-ready career. But they don't realize in social studies we are teaching communication skills, writing skills, critical thinking skills, analyzing sources, things that employers are looking for but don't necessarily connect with social studies. And that's why we're sort of put on that back burner.
It does make sense for how we got to that point. It's a little disappointing, especially considering that we've talked in the past, both David and I. David's currently elected to a municipal seat. I am a recovering politician. So we see the value that you're talking to people that live and see that and how that impacts people every day, and it's kind of I can see why things like this are so critical, to be able to tell people that, hey, this is how things work, this is why it's important, because you do have to navigate that system, just from the standpoint of, just imagine opening a business. There's so much involved in there that you're dealing with, from your local zoning officer the whole way up to registering with the state and the Department of State and stuff, that you have to play in that world just to do that.
Oh, yeah.
And it kind of just gets back burner, like you said.
Yeah.
But I guess some of it, I think, because I don't want to say it's shocking to me, but whether it's social studies, civic engagement, that it's taken a back seat. Mm-hmm. And I think, I don't want to assume, but could it be assumed that these are skills we just think people know? Because, as Matt mentioned, being part of a municipality, how many times do you say to somebody, it just doesn't work that way? Like, you've got to come to the council meeting. It just doesn't work that way. And you would think that somebody would assume that some of these social studies skills or civic engagement skills would just be second nature. But as we get further and further, I think, away from that, I think things happen where, it's that old adage, if I don't tell you what it is, I fill in the answer myself. And people think this is how it works. And you're like, that's not how. I didn't vote, but I want to complain. It doesn't work that way. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's one thing. Before I let you answer, I did want to ask you one last question before we lose you. Talk a little bit more about the Democracy Bowl.
Okay. So the Democracy Bowl, it's our pride and joy, what we're doing with this professional development. That's where we bring the students to the campus. So these professional developments, it's just the teachers. We're getting the show ready for Democracy Bowl. In April, we bring the students up here. This will be the second time we're hosting it here at UPJ, second time hosting it ever. We are super proud of it. There are many different avenues for the students to pursue. So for last year's Democracy Bowl, There were portions where students who engaged in community service projects, either with their district, either their local church, if they have a club in their district, they could bring presentations to our Democracy Bowl, show them off. There's judges, panelists who went around, evaluated them, and several of the students actually went home with monetary prizes from their community service. Another portion of the Democracy Bowl is the civics education portion. That is the trivia bowl portion of it, where teams from all over the area, we had teams as far away from as Indiana County come last year. The students compete on teams of 4. They're asked different government, history, civics questions, and several of them also went home with monetary prizes too. So it's just a way to show civics is relatable, that students are studying it, and to really shine a spotlight on these students who are exemplifying what civics education is.
So give an example. I know someone mentioned something about trivia questions. Give a couple of examples.
So,
what would be a civics trivia question? Because I think you're going to see where this is going. Give me a civics trivia question for an example.
So some of the ones I like are the questions that involve the Constitution. I'm not one for regurgitation in my classroom. Yes, the content's important. I want to know how you can use the content. So a lot of the questions will give scenarios. Just for example, a police officer pulls you over and they ask you to step out of a vehicle to search your car. Is this allowable or not? And the students have to figure out, okay, which of the amendments applies to the situation. Like, oh, Fourth Amendment, search and seizure. So there's a lot of those applicable questions. Last year is very heavy on the content, bare bones. It was our first year. We're getting it off the ground and running. As we go forward, we want to have more scenario-based questions. And ultimately, my dream with sticking with this, I would love to have students be able to debate each other, bring sort of court cases in, and have the students look at it from both perspectives and apply the Constitution to the court case and try to make a defense either for or against that particular case.
I mean, I think it's interesting. I mean, because the more I sit and think about how important this is, you said it may not be an employable goal, but skills that people are learning. But I can tell you, this. I guess there's like kind of this is what is going to keep democracy alive, correct?
Yeah,
knowing
100%.
these skills, I can tell you. In my past, I've poll watched, and I've seen people come into the polling place, and when handed a ballot, they've asked the person, "What is this?" And there's the look for our next guest, the looking and shaking the head, and I'm like, "Okay, democracy means everybody gets a chance," but I'm questioning if you don't know what the ballot is. Should there have been a trivia question before you got in? It was an interesting. I also, just recently, I was listening to something on XM, and they were talking about recently. I guess it was a couple of months ago. Bill Clinton walked into a McDonald's, and the manager went up to him and said, "Are you Joe?" "Oh my God, are you Joe?" And he went, "I'm Bill Clinton." And the woman was like, "Oh my God, it's Bill Clinton, it's Bill Clinton." And I'm like thinking, this was all within our recent history. Two candidates that were very, very much in the news every day, and I thought, there's something wrong here.
Mm-hmm.
There's trivia questions where you don't know what a ballot is. I mean, it used to be people didn't know where their polling places were. But when you work those polling places and you see somebody come in and say, "What do I do with this?" I don't want to say it, but you almost want to say, maybe this is
It shows
democracy.
the value of this.
The value of,
There you
exactly.
go.
Thank you.
Let me dig you out of that hole.
Thank you. Thank you, because I'm
thrilled. It's a great event. John, thank you so much for coming and spending
Thanks for
time
having
with us
me.
and picking. Sorry, Charlene put you in the hot seat, and it's not the seat we ask questions in. It's literally you're just against the heater in this lobby.
No,
and
it is. I love this right now. It feels so good with this cold weather out here.
So thank you so much for coming and spending some time with us, and we wish you well for the rest of the program for today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Nice to meet you both. Nice to meet you too.
Well, I'm glad to have our next guest. Our next guest is our keynote speaker for the entire event, Teacher of the Year, Mr. Smith. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
What's your focus here today, beyond giving the keynote?
Really just learning strategies and meeting people teaching is a passion of mine. I enjoy everything related to education, and so I'm always welcoming opportunities that I can to become better. I'm a lifelong learner, and so a lot of the sessions seem to be built upon how can we get students more engaged. And I'm always looking to try to, emulate that in my classroom, and just kind of piggybacking off of what you just said, like, we have to really think about what is the next thing. What are the students going to do next? And so, how can we create activities in our classroom that's going to prepare them so that they can be effective members of our democracy? Because, we see it right now. We're struggling a little bit. I think that a lot of division, which is not new. I mean, that's happened in history, but we really have to let the students know that there are ways to find consensus, and there are ways that we can see the humanity in others. And I'm hoping that I can, gain some strategies where I can have the students practice that in my classroom.
That's a neat thing. For those who don't know, let's talk a little bit about your background before we get into the more specifics. Because you're not an alum of UPJ.
No.
You could be still. If we'd like some pamphlets, we have some here if you want to come back. No, but what's your background?
So this is my 24th year as an educator.
You don't look older than 24. I mean,
No, he looks much better than you and I do.
at 24, even.
But I teach at Haverford High School in Delaware County, which is right outside of Philadelphia. I'm a social
So
studies.
can you spell Eagles?
Oh, come on. EAGLES
All right, there
Eagles.
we
You
go.
know what's happening this weekend. We are very excited.
Well, this will air next Wednesday. So future you is either going to be
okay,
really
so-
excited.
we're going to be excited.
Okay.
I'm very confident. We're going to be really
I think the entire nation, by the way, is rooting for the Eagles.
Well-
which is a little different
it
position
is.
than they've been in the past.
It has.
right?
It is.
So you teach out of Delaware County.
Yep, I teach out of Delaware County, social studies teacher. I also am a basketball coach, and I'm a father, and I also teach AP US history, and so it's just really exciting to be able to just bring new stuff to the classroom. I also work with Teach Plus, where I have an opportunity to work with legislators. So the advocacy piece is what is intriguing to me, because I get a chance to, because I tell students what I do, but I'm excited that I actually get a chance to have them participate in activities that they could actually see some of the things that I'm doing outside of the classroom as well.
So you actually to take them to, you've done, I don't know, what does that look like going to city meetings, council meetings, Harrisburg?
Yeah, well,
all the above?
Yeah, it could be that, and it's also just having them engage in those types of practices, within the classroom, consensus building, understanding, identifying a problem, and developing advocacy tactics in order to try to reach a goal with regard to that. Who do we need to talk to? So those are some of the things that I'm doing outside of the classroom. I'm excited that they get a chance to do that themselves.
Let me ask a question. I know we talked earlier with Mark, our first guest, and I think assuming that it gets harder and harder to teach with neutrality.
Yeah.
I use an example from education in elementary school all the way up to the college level. When I went to school here, I knew which professors were leaning to which side, and it was pretty obvious. I guess my question is skills, or how do you teach the teacher to stay to approach it from neutrality when things become more and more polarized, and things become, you used the word advocacy.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people sometimes confuse the word advocacy with the word argument. Two different things. So talk a little bit about strategic ways to teach advocacy, not advocacy, to teach neutrality. And I'm sure it's a big part in today's education.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I think I'm in a very supportive district. I feel very fortunate in that regard. But I think where the focus is the skills and being able to look at a particular topic and understand multiple perspectives, and to be able to say, hey, for example, we were talking about James Polk, and we were talking about Manifest Destiny and 5440 or Fight Oregon and reannexation of Texas and things like that, and we were looking at, okay, so when I would teach that, I would kind of just talk about it. But I'm saying, but now we live in a time where we do have a president that's saying, hey, Canada's the 51st state, or, get Greenland or whatever. And I said, so as people living in this society, let's let's sit with that for a minute. Like, how do you feel? You don't have to feel anyway. Do you feel nationalism? Do you feel anger?
Sure.
And so really just trying to give them opportunities to put themselves in positions of people that lived in previous times when some of the same things were happening, so they can have a greater appreciation for the diversity of feelings that people may feel.
So I think, to your point, I guess, now looking at it that way, this is an exciting time to be a civics teacher.
Yeah.
I can tell, I grew up, high school in the 70s, elementary in the 70s, high school in the 80s.
Yeah.
Wasn't a lot going on. You know what I mean? We had some presidencies that were kind of like, that guy's still president 4 years later, sort of thing. But I mean, it's, to your point, I think it's very refreshing to say that, you have to look back at like, the 60s or back to when, slavery was an issue. Now we live in a time where you can just, rip it from the headlines and say, here's what's going on. Believe it or not, there's discussion points. And I think you're right. It's important to get that. It's hard to say, look at the other person's side. Very hard. And I go back to think, again, like the fight for slavery. I mean, we had this thing called the Civil War that split the country. And people, just like, I think a lot of that, again, I think is an exciting place to be. And I think it's exciting to hear you using something that as the fuel for those discussions.
Yeah, and I think the key thing
from a
is,
neutral point.
Well, it is, and you have to develop a community in your classroom. Like, that has to start. Like, it's so interesting. Early in my career, I was kind of under the mindset that, like, the first day you just got to start, right? Like, here we go, because as a history teacher, what if you don't finish? Like, what if you don't get to Reagan or whatever it is? Like, the kids are going to be lost, But the idea is you have to develop a relationship with those students. There has to be a community in that classroom, because then when you have those discussions, there can be dialogue, and you don't have to worry necessarily about people maybe being insensitive, because there's kind of that trust that's been built in that classroom. So that's important, that, like, you can't start off having these conversations on the first day. You certainly cannot. You definitely have to make sure that the students know that you care about them. You really have to develop, and we work on that all year. Like, all year, every day when I start my lesson, I always have some type of fun question, some type of like community building question, just to really kind of just get everybody like relax a little bit, and then here we go, as opposed to, all right, and I'm going to throw something really crazy at you. I mean, nobody would be good with that.
Yeah. But some people, I think that's the challenge, because there's this little thing called civil discourse.
Yeah.
And sometimes people, I think civil discourse means if I can yell louder than you.
Yeah.
That's the discourse that, and I think and again, I think it gets back to, the point of being how important are these subjects. And again, I went through where you're teaching, at that age in the 70s and 80s, where you're right. We learned about a bunch of old guys that, there was not this kind of stuff going on.
It's an interesting point, because we talked to a faculty member. I won't rat him out because I don't know if he's sensitive about the age issue, but he always used to tell me, he's like, I was so glad to see my name on the roster, because I talk. And it was during a time when it was a little slow, and you'd throw out an idea or talk about a concept, and everyone just vacant-eyed stare, like, I don't care. When's lunch? Let me get, and I'm coming, and I want to have this discussion. Let's go. And, it does make and I try to work that in my classes, and it's it actually makes the job more fun at the end of the day, because it just, you sit there and read the slides or read them the book. They can do that.
Tell you what, I learned more from Schoolhouse Rock than I did from Schoolhouse Building sometime, I think.
But they have so many, but that's the other thing. Like, they can watch videos.
Oh, yeah.
They can watch TikTok. So, like, if you're not doing something, like, exciting in your class, like, you've lost them.
But in that same discussion, sometimes that's the history lesson.
Yeah.
Because, it's, again, as we get further and further advanced into, like, I made the Schoolhouse Rock joke, but that was Saturday morning on a TV that you could get. Now it's on your phone. Now it's, so-and-so said, or, it's funny, because I'm interested even like in the trivia questions, how many of the sources are YouTube or TikTok or my father said, so I think you're right. There's a challenge that could work either way.
Yeah.
It's a good thing, but it could also be, memes are not history books.
Right. And how do we provide the skill-based instruction where students can critically analyze like what source I should use. Is it okay if I just heard it from this one person, right? Like how do I corroborate that?
Yeah.
So that's really important because we live in this fast-paced, everybody just wants to be finished. Like, all right, I found out, I'm done. You know what I mean? And just, you have to do the work to be able to say like, is this really what happened, you know?
What other challenges do you see? I mean, I know these are some of the obvious challenges. Being Teacher of the Year, I mean, that wasn't just a show-up award, I'm sure.
No.
So what other challenges do you think that are out there that are not the obvious challenges for teaching?
For teaching, I think key is how do we keep teachers in the classroom? I think that's important because I think that a lot of teachers are getting burned out. I think COVID was very difficult for a lot of educators because educators love relationships. And, you know, during that time, you didn't see the students, you saw black screens.
Yeah.
And I think that for a lot of the educators now, too, with a lot of professions, is like we're constantly on call, right? With email, people are emailing you 9, 10 o'clock at night, you know, and so the question becomes, how do we create that balance where, you know, educators can be their best selves when they're with their students, but at the same time, they have that time to just kind of rejuvenate and just be themselves. So I think retention is really key. We always talk about recruitment, but we got to keep teachers in the classroom. And then I guess I would also say, you know, some of the mental health challenges that I think students are struggling with, because I think when I first started teaching, there was kind of this mentality where it's like, you kind of just were like, come on, you're all right. Like, just, it's all right. Like, just get over it, you know? And I think now, you know, it's really like, all right, we gotta make sure that the students are okay, because you can stand on your head, you can be the most effective educator, but if those students are not right, nothing's happening. You know, a lot of research has been done in like brain science, and like I found out about that. Like if they talk about if the student has gone through some type of trauma or something, then the way their brain is working is at the brain stem. They can't. So here you have this great lesson where you want them to think abstractly, and they can't, like, because of something that happened to them, their brain is operating at that stem. So just how is it in our classrooms that we can create environments where students can get assistance if they're struggling? How can the schools create that so that the learning can actually take place?
And I think you hit a good point, because at least in in much of my experience that I've had talking with and we are effectively graduating the class that would have been through COVID, that even that in itself was almost something that was almost a shared generational trauma to these students, that you had something that disrupted their entire lives, how the system was, the routine and all of it, with no real understanding of how that was going to work, and turning to folks. I'm sure you got people asked you questions. What are we doing? How's this work? How are we gonna? And we didn't know anything either.
We were just
so you
figuring
kind
it
of
out.
lose that I don't want to say facade, but it does fall away. Yeah, you know what? We're all humans that sometimes we don't know the answers either, and they kind of have to deal with that and process that in their own way. It is a difference that they all dealt with, and it is changing. It changed how I teach, and I think how a lot of people taught and learned and will continue to process over that time. And certainly adjusting that to then how you apply it to these kind of concepts that we're talking about today. How did that work with government and population and democracy and here's these things that we're going to teach you about and learn about, except for some of them sometimes it doesn't work that way. And you know, you're allowed to do these things, but except it adds a nuance to it.
Yeah, it does. It does, you know, and that's why the Constitution is a living document, you know, because they didn't write down what to do in a pandemic, you know, and here's the steps, you know, but that's why they have to be critical consumers. They have to be able to look at it and say, okay, well, can this happen? Can the government force car manufacturers to make ventilators because there's not enough during COVID? Like, does the government have that type of power, you know? What happens to civil liberties when there's a crisis, you know?
Excuse me. And I think it's interesting. You said this is a 24-year career.
Yeah.
So check my math, that's a quarter of a century.
Yeah.
That's by many means a long time. But again, I think it's kind of reiterating the fact that over those 24 years, the changes you've seen, that maybe some teachers in a whole career, maybe 50 to 60 years, had never seen this. You talk about the Constitution being a living document, but I guess education and those lessons have to be a living document. I guess two-part question. First part question is, what are some of those changes you've seen other than the obvious changes? How does that affected how you deliver what you do? And I guess my second part, because I did want to ask this one first, but I'm going to ask it second. What part, good or bad, do the parents and the families now play in education? Over those 24 years, there's been a lot of changes.
I would say one of the changes I've seen is probably, I guess, the delivery of instruction. I think that I still do some of the aspect where I have the kids read and then we talk about it, but really trying to use the class time as more of an application thing, because there's so many different ways, people talk about like the flipped classroom, and there's so many different ways where, the students can kind of get some content outside of class. Certainly in class you can review with them, but really trying to use that class time as like, all right, let's do an activity, let's have you apply this. So I think that's a change that I've seen. And then also the computers is big, because when I first started, it was like, all right, like we had a computer lab. I mean, it was like a big deal to actually go to the computer. Like kids, we're going to the computer lab today and we're going to type this thing up, And now, I mean, the kids, it's crazy. Like they'll drop a computer on the floor and they'll be like, oh, all right. I'm like, but like I come from a generation where I'm like, you just dropped a computer. Yeah. Like the world is about to end, So really just how I've had to adapt my instruction where like when I first started, I was like, all right, guys, here's what you need in your binder. Like your parents, you guys are going to have to go to Staples and get dividers.
Trapper keeper.
And all of those things, And now it's like, all right, well, I can help you in terms of like if you want to have a Google folder and maybe you want to create subfolders and how you want to do that. And then also, if I am delivering instruction, maybe part of my lesson is a lecture or something. How is it that I keep the students engaged when some students I can tell are playing games or doing online shopping or whatever it may be? How is it that you can make sure that they're still getting what you need them to get? So that's something I've struggled with a little bit.
It's an interest. I often point out to no matter what class I'm teaching, because it's kind of fun when you think about it, and you made me think about it. I tell my students, the minute I say this, you have access to more information than any human being has ever had in the history of the world. And you are never going to have the least amount of access than you will also at this moment, because it continues to grow and continues to get better. So it has been one of those, it's that weird kind of, and they look at me kind of like, and they start thinking like, you're right. This is one of those things that kind of, I'm going to be smarter from this point forward and more access than ever before, but I'm also the most connected human beings that have ever existed on the planet.
But I think there's a difference between being smarter and just, how can I say it? There's a difference between being smart and having knowledge. You always hear
information and wisdom.
Information and wisdom. Let me look it up. And again, I'll go back to, so where did you get your information? That's a meme. Or, you're right. It's, you were talking about a computer lab. My computer lab is powered by Verizon. And it fits in my pocket. And,
they're not a sponsor.
and I still get that feeling whenever, a computer's dropped. I'm like,
Yes. My heart drops.
What's going on here?
But now, I mean, you can buy a Chromebook for like $200. I mean, like when I was coming up, like that was like if your parent got you a computer, like that was it. Like if that thing broke, well, I don't know.
That was it.
That was it.
Yeah,
like
you went to Radio Shack.
You're not getting another one. Like,
that was it. You make it last.
Make
it last. But and again, the second part of that question is what part, good or bad, are the changes that parents have played in the last 24 years in educating students?
I think it's been pretty consistent. I mean, I think parents care about their children. And I think for me, when I was a younger teacher, I was very sensitive. And so if there was any type of like parent feedback I got, good, bad, and different, like I got really like worked up about it, and I couldn't really understand where that particular parent was coming from. But now that I'm a parent myself, I think I've done a much better job in communicating with parents and really understanding, even if they're angry or whatever, like just having a better understanding of like, they love their child, right? So what is it that I can do to help them to get a perspective of like what I'm seeing, and then ultimately how can we work together? Because that's the goal at the end of the day. The goal at the end of the day is for the student to be successful.
You want to have productive citizens.
Yes.
I think it's always back to this, how important is civics? How important is social studies?
Yep.
If you don't have a productive, I mean,
Yeah.
it's an irony here that I'd even have to say that. If you don't have productive citizenship, you got a mess.
We were in trouble.
Yeah, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got people coming into polling places
Yeah.
and asking what a ballot is, or, voting for the first Bush.
Yeah. Oh my
That was
gosh.
out long before the second. You know what I mean? Just, they're not the same guy.
No.
They're two different father son. Or God, I always got confused about the Adamses. When I was learning that in social
John Adams
studies.
or John Quincy Adams.
Yeah, like, well, are they related? Are they the same guy? What's going on here? But yeah, it's maybe that's getting back to what is the importance of today.
Yeah.
What is the importance of what social studies teachers do? It's a little, for me, concerning.
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
Never realizing that these classes were put on the back burner of like.
Because there's no keystone.
that's weird.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh well, since there's no keystone, like if we don't have social studies class today, it's all right. You know what I mean? As long
What
as we
gets-
have math and
What gets cut out on snow days?
Yeah. That's really it.
Yeah.
Well, it didn't get cut out today.
No, it
No.
did not.
And it's a great event, and I see some of the sessions started back up, but I don't want to hold you too long. Leon Smith, thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for
Thank
sitting
you,
with
guys.
us.
I really appreciate it.
We
Thank you for
appreciate
having
you
me.
coming to campus, and we will make sure we get you that enrollment information so we can get you signed up for something. You'll love my
we can get
geography
you alumni
class.
swag.
Oh,
You got to be an
man.
alumni to
I
get alumni
appreciate it.
swag.
Thank you. It was a pleasure talking
Thank
to
you
you guys.
so much for coming and spending time with us today.
Thank you.
Well, David, I think the event has been fantastic.
I
As
would agree.
always, the Education Division does an amazing job, and they seem to enjoy us coming to these things, and I think we're going to keep doing it as long as they'll have us.
Absolutely.
Well, David, have a great week. We're going to be getting ready for Winterfest coming up in a couple days, so we hope to see everybody there. We'll have our live show. Follow us on the social medias because that's where you're going to keep the schedule going, be able to register for these events. And I'm going to tell you to have a great week, David.
I'm going to try. I'm going to do the same.
And everyone else, have a great one too. We'll see you later. Bye. The Tuck Shop podcast is recorded live on the University of Pittsburgh at Johnstown campus. Update your contact information with us by visiting johnstown.pitt.edu/alumni. Connect with us online via Facebook and LinkedIn, or consider donating to the university at give2, that's giveto.pitt.edu/giveupj.
This has been a production of Quantum Wave Media. Views expressed do not necessarily reflect the opinion of the University of Pittsburgh at Johnstown.